What causes diacetyl, the butterscotch off flavor in beer? Imagine taking a sip of your favorite beer and suddenly noticing a sweet, buttery smell that doesn't quite belong. That's often caused by a chemical called diacetyl. So, what exactly leads to this off flavor showing up in beer? Let's explore the science behind it. During fermentation, yeast is busy converting sugars into alcohol and carbon dioxide. As part of this process, yeast also makes amino acids like valine. To do this, yeast produces an intermediate compound called alpha-acetylactate. This compound leaks out of the yeast cells into the beer. Once outside, alpha-acetylactate slowly reacts with oxygen and turns into diacetyl. Diacetyl has a distinct buttery or butterscotch aroma and flavor. Normally, yeast is pretty good at cleaning up after itself. Later in fermentation, yeast reabsorbs diacetyl and converts it into less noticeable compounds like 23-butanediol or acetoin. This cleanup process is essential to keep the beer tasting clean and fresh. But if the fermentation isn't managed properly, problems can happen. For example, if the yeast is removed too early, or if the yeast isn't healthy enough, it might not reabsorb all the diacetyl. Also, if the fermentation temperature is too low or too high, the yeast's ability to clean up diminishes. Sometimes, contamination plays a role too. Certain bacteria like Pediococcus and Lactobacillus produce diacetyl independently. These bacteria can spoil beer by adding buttery or sour notes, especially if sanitation isn't tight. Breweries brewing lagers are especially careful because their clean, crisp profile makes any buttery flavor stand out. To prevent this, brewers often use a technique called a diacetyl rest. They raise the fermentation temperature near the end to encourage yeast to reabsorb diacetyl before cooling and packaging the beer. So, in simple terms, diacetyl comes from yeast during fermentation, especially when the cleanup process is incomplete. Proper yeast health, fermentation management, and sanitation are key to controlling diacetyl levels. When conducting a tasting or sensory evaluation, being aware of diacetyl helps identify off flavors early. Recognizing this buttery note can tell you a lot about how well the beer was brewed and handled. Keeping an on fermentation conditions and cleanliness is the best way to keep your beer tasting its best.